With all the religious perspectives in the world, how do we know which religious perspective is the correct one to follow? Many people believe that there is differences in religious perspectives. Many people believe that none of these stories are actually all related. However, I would like to bring up just one story in Greek mythology. For instance, the story of Hercules. Many have heard of Hercules being a superhuman man, but have you heard that in the Bible there's also another man that goes by the name of Samson, who is super strong? Now, the parallel between these two strong men stories is ridiculously uncanny. For instance, Hercules' first wife dies in a fire. Samson's first wife dies in a fire. Hercules is known for beating people with a blunt object and defeating entire armies. Samson is also known for beating people with a blunt object and defeat entire armies. Both Hercules and Samson kill a lion with their bare hands. Hercules tears the gates off of a city and carries them up the mountain. Samson also rips the gates off of a city and carries them up the mountain. Samson's downfall is by a woman named Delilah. Hercules' downfall is by a woman named Deniira. Isn't that suspiciously similar? You see, many people think that all the stories and all the religious perspectives around the world are unconnected and unrelated. That's why people think there's a variety of different religious choices or perspectives you could choose. For instance, Hinduism, or you can believe Buddhism, or you can believe Muslim. So many people think there's multiple religious perspectives and that not all religious perspectives are connected. For instance, let's talk about the flood myth and the story of China by the person that goes by the name Nuwa. Doesn't that sound a little bit like Noah, Nuwa, and the flood? Isn't that fascinating? In fact, the word for big boat in ancient Chinese is actually the word vessel plus the word mouth plus the word 8, meaning 8 persons on a vessel. And in the story of Noah, there was 8 persons that got on the boat that survived the flood. Now, it's very interesting how much the biblical context spans across all religious perspectives and every facet of every religion. Hindu culture, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, Muslim culture, all of these things all relate back to biblical context and understandings. Now, it makes you wonder, like, was the Bible just ripping these stories from all these different religious perspectives? Like, how do we know, like, it's not the Anunnaki that we should be following and their religious story? After all, the Anunnaki stories are much older than the biblical context that we have preserved today. So how do we know what is the correct narrative? The difference is the biblical context not only has connecting threads to all of the religious perspectives, but it also cohesively strings together the narrative that makes sense of these stories. You see, these stories are all one-offs in other cultures. One-offs that don't really have relevancy to other stories, or not even relevancy to other religions. For instance, there is no super strong Hercules character in Chinese tradition. However, the characters in Chinese stories relate back to the Bible, as well as the ones in Greek mythology also relate back to the Bible. All the stories, all the religious perspective relate to the Bible. See, the difference is this, though. The biblical context gives you a narrative, and it explains what all these things really are. Whereas the other religious perspectives are blinded by what they actually think these things are. Like, for instance, the Anunnaki are more than likely connected to the same race of giant people called the Anakim. The Anakim, which were a race of angel-human hybrid giants, genetically altered beings that took over the entire earth before the flood and said that they were gods. You can read about what these beings did specifically in the book of Enoch, Jasher, Jubilees, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Anakim, the Nephilim, they're the same beings. But you see, the Anakim beings, or rather their predecessors, the Anunnaki, is the reason why the biblical God of the Bible flooded the entire earth. He destroyed it because the Anunnaki took over everything and said that they were gods. That's why the stories of the Anunnaki are actually older than the biblical context, because this was before the flood where everything got destroyed. So the biblical context that extended after the flood was kept in writing, not kept on stones, because everything was wiped out, because the Anunnaki took over everything. That's why all these ancient, magnificent, and megalithic sites that are destroyed all seem to pay homage to the gods. These were the gods that got destroyed in the flood. That's why this exists everywhere. And these Anakim Nephilim hybrid angelic beings even relate to stories in our world today. For instance, Star Wars probably chose the name Anakin Skywalker as a reference to the Nephilim, Anakim, that come from the sky. This is how all the stories are pulling from today, relating to stories from the ancient biblical context. In Hinduism, they believe Shiva is a god of chaos. They don't know that Shiva is actually a fallen angel, Nephilim, brought about from inbreeding. You see, this is why in India they worship inbred people that have multiple arms and legs. This is derived from the origin of the giants that were trying to keep their lineage alive by inbreeding, and it created deformities. So a lot of the gods had deformities, extra rows of teeth, 6 fingers, which we see in the biblical context, 6 fingers, 6 toes. These things were deformities from inbreeding. And that inbreeding happened further and further and further as they tried to keep their genetic superiority alive. You see, there's very different types of genetic defects when it comes to mutations. The mutations of doubling of fingers, polydactylism, or doubling of arms and hands, these type of genetic defects come about from inbreeding, because the genetic code is like, oh, right, a finger, but well, we already got a finger. Oh, well, we need another one because the code is still there saying we need one. And then boom, all of a sudden you get splitting effects, splitting digits, doubling effects. This kind of stuff comes about from inbreeding. Inbreeding to keep their Nephilim superiority genetics alive. This is exactly why people in India worship people with defects. They believe that they were of the gods, descendants of Vishnu and Shiva, because these beings were real once upon a time, and they were descendants of the fallen angels, which alludes back to the book of Enoch, which alludes back to the Bible. You see, every single story, every single myth, every single legend in the entire world points back to the stories of the Bible, whether you believe it or not.